Cannabis is legal in Canada, and in the third part of our Cannabis series with Terry Donnelly, the CEO of Hill Street Beverage Company, who joins us in studio now, along with Toronto criminal lawyer Jacob Stillman, we are going to be talking about cannabis and the law. So thanks for coming in today. Let's start with what is legal, Jacob. I'm quite stunned that a person can walk around with 30 grams. That's over an ounce. It used to be like trafficking amounts.
Well, that's how the legislation is structured. Obviously, different people have different capacities, and that's the number that they've
selected.
Arrived at. I mean, every high school drug dealer knows that there's 28 grams in an ounce, so this is actually slightly more than 1 ounce, but when you actually look at what some of the medical licenses permitted, they permitted absurd amounts of product to be in people's possession, and that is obviously before this new legislation came in. So in its wisdom, I mean, people have to acquire this stuff and presumably keep a stash, so there's the problem of, well, if you're getting it from your dispensary, you've got to get it home, and if you can only buy 1 gram at a time, that would be kind of unworkable.
So where exactly can you buy it legally now? Is it just through ocs.ca?
It's, for now, that's my understanding. That's going to change as provinces ramp up their distribution policies and statutes. Bear in mind that the legislation envisions a provincially governed distribution process. So it's going to be variable across the country. Right now in Ontario, it's legal weed is only available online for the next little while anyhow.
And so the bricks and mortar stores will come in
April. They said April next year. They said they'll start.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So can you, if I bought some online, am I legally allowed to give some to Christine? Can you share it with a friend?
Yes, you can. You are allowed to distribute, as per the Cannabis Act, up to 30 grams to another person, as long as that person is of age and not a young person. The more troubling question is, does distribute mean sell? And that's where things are, at least in my mind, a little bit murky.
So I could give it to Christine, but I couldn't ask her maybe to pay 50% share.
Well, you could give it to me, and then I could give you $400.
Yeah, well, I think the way
murky. It
is murky.
It's a slippery slope.
The term distribute certainly doesn't preclude sale, but then when you drill down into the Cannabis Act, then there are specific provisions for the sale. So we're going to have to see how that one works out. However, I think the way it's going to shake out is this. If you have your own stash, say you've grown a plant and you've got a bumper crop, I suspect that it won't be a problem to privately sell, as long as selling is not a sort of public offer. You're not setting up a weed for sale site or any other kind of public distribution. I think Christine could pay you $20 for a couple of grams and you wouldn't have any problems.
Now, Terry, the cannabis infused beverages, which you are coming up with a cannabis infused wine, but beverages, cookies, edibles, still illegal.
Yeah, they're illegal until the next phase of the act comes into power, which is projected to be October 2019. And we've had actually a lot of people ask us questions about whether or not it's okay to make your own. And how the sort of craft or homemade cookies and homemade wines and butters and all those kinds of things
really good point.
will be treated, you know. And so it's a big gray area. I kind of tell people what's happened is they've told us, if I was to use a sports analogy, they've told us that we're going to play a new game. Here's a ball. We want you to outfit a team, assemble a team, get all the right equipment and uniforms for them, and we'll let you know next July exactly what game it is and what kind of field it's going to be played on and what kind of equipment you'll need regardless of what you went out and purchased. So, it's a little bit of a murky area for companies like us that are preparing to produce a bottle of wine. And yet we have no idea if
non-alcoholic, we should clarify.
Well, we produce a non-alcoholic wine. It has, a normal size and normal number of servings. And nobody can tell me right now if that's going to be allowed, if you're going to have 5 servings in a bottle of infused wine.
But that's you as a business. But for private citizens, I can't imagine there's an issue making...
Yeah, I think once you own
brownies.
if you want to make pot brownies, I think you can just go ahead and knock yourself out.
Pot butter?
Well, that's how you do it. Is you take the cannabis and you turn it into a butter by extracting the oil.
Cooker.
Yeah, and then mix it with the oil, and because you need the cannabis oil to bind with another fat. So butter is the most common thing. Then you use the butter to make cookies.
Okay, so Jacob, a lot of people are worried about impaired driving. The 25 and under set have been pretty darn impressive when it comes to not drinking and driving, yet 44% admit to driving within an hour of smoking a joint. Would that be legal?
It depends.
Okay.
The devil here is really going to be in the details and in the execution of the new impaired by cannabis driving provisions. And I could go all day because there are just so many issues that arise here. The bottom line is they've got what we call in law a per se limit, meaning anything above a set THC blood concentration is going to be a crime, the same way presently driving with over 80 milligrams of alcohol in your blood is a crime.
Okay, and that limit is 2 nanograms per milliliter
so
blood.
It's a different...
No idea what that means.
I know. What does it mean? Like,
well,
1 puff, 2 puffs, a joint, half a joint? It depends, I guess, probably on your size.
And the strength of what you're smoking.
That's the big problem. I think everybody knows that, they're good for 1 beer or X number of beers over the course of an evening and not run afoul of the law. Nobody is really going to be able, at least for a good long while, to calibrate their own consumption and know that they are now onside or offside. People just have no idea. Now that, however, is likely not going to be a defense because the way the law has always worked is if you drink, even though you may think someone was giving you single shots and really you were drinking double shots, if you're over the limit, too bad, you're going to be in trouble.
What is the law exactly when it comes to cannabis and is it the same thing as drinking if you have... how do they test you?
Okay. Well, this is a problem, too, because the machines, the Draeger testing machines, don't work under 4 degrees Celsius.
Well, there's a lot of different issues, but basically it's going to come down to this. If you're behind the wheel and the officer, in the words of the language of the legislation, reasonably suspects you have drugs in your body, she is entitled to do one of 2 things. One, if they are qualified, administer mandatory roadside sobriety tests. Now, that's already been in there for a while. And presumably you get evaluated at the roadside, and if you fail, he then has the grounds, I keep saying he, but the officer has the grounds to arrest you for impaired by drug. The other way that's probably we'll see more regularly resorted to is the roadside screening device, which is designed to detect an illegal THC blood concentration through the testing of a saliva sample. Now, that's where you're quite right. There's some controversy because these units have not really been on the market that long, and they may not operate in cold temperatures. There's a lot of issues that are going to arise.
speaking of issues, let's talk charter issues, because I don't understand what the framework is then for the police officer suspicion. I mean, are you playing Bob Marley on the radio? Is that enough? Like, what would it take?
Well, that's an excellent question. And the problem is this, because with alcohol, there are pretty obvious, objectively verifiable signs of alcohol consumption. You're going to have an odor, you're going to have facial appearances, speech impediments, coordination issues that are readily identifiable and pretty well universal. Cannabis really does not operate that way to the same effect. And police officers are going to be justifying these stops and sample or sobriety test demands on what I anticipate will be the vaguest of hunches. And that's where charter concerns are really, I think, going to initially crystallize. You're going to have a period where the courts are going to have to grapple with ostensible justifications for these kind of investigative techniques that are really going to be very questionable and very subjective.
Well, the Supreme Court has been pretty tough on who's allowed to drug test employees. The TTC came under that. So sort of what changes do you see coming down the pipe in that aspect?
I'll jump in on this one. I'm primarily a criminal lawyer, but I'll take a venture on this one. Obviously, simplest case, guy's working on a construction site operating a crane. He goes off on his coffee break and smokes up. I think his foreman would have justification to fire him. There's going to be obvious acute situations where, just as it would be dangerous to have a beer during your break in the middle of your work day, an employer would be justified in saying, sorry, you can't smoke up middle of the day. Those kind of restrictions have always been obvious in the workforce. Ultimately, there's going to have to be some kind of equilibrium established between what constitutes a reasonable restriction, a discriminatory restriction, and an arbitrary one. So these are probably going to be resolved through private litigation, human rights tribunal litigation, insurance type of claims, and we'll see. It's going to be a long road on that front.
Now, Terry, you own a company. What kind? Tell us what you guys are doing.
Well, we basically have taken the policy that we had in place for alcohol, which obviously, in the business that we're in, which is beverages, we're around it all the time. And so we expect our employees to act reasonably and responsibly and to use their best judgment. But we've seen some interesting cannabis companies. For example, there's one that's actually invested in by the Laborers International Union. And so this is the cannabis that the union actually sponsors in their health program as a therapeutic treatment for their members. So we've seen some organizations take very forward-thinking views to cannabis as a medicinal agent to help remediate conditions and get workers back to work, or to deal with the aches and pains that come from especially physical labor. But I think it's going to be a really interesting next couple of years, as this morning's headline in the paper was that this is a gold mine for lawyers. It's a compliance industry built around a product.
Jacob, you're smiling
because of exactly what Jacob pointed out, which is you can tell. Usually, there are signs that people have been drinking too much, and there are not the same signs, visible signs, that people may have smoked.
And the smell of smoking hemp with CBD is identical to the smell of smoking cannabis with THC.
The other problem, just to jump in on that one, is what we call in the business confirmation bias. You're going to have a police officer whose spidey senses are tingling, and any deviation from what the officer thinks it should be the norm is going to trigger further suspicion or arrest. I mean, if you have a bad back, you may have a problem walking a line, but tell that to the judge.
Right. It's so much to take in, but we thank you very much for breaking it down for us. You can learn more about what Hill Street is doing at hillstreetbeverages.com. And Jacob, how can people connect with you?
Oh, well, I operate in the Greater Toronto Area. My law firm is Logreco Stillman, LLP, and we service the entire GTA. You can find us online at www.lslaw.ca.
Thank you very much.
She said